You know the name Ragnar Lothbrok. Maybe you've seen him portrayed as this larger-than-life figure, a legendary Viking king. But when you start digging into the sources, who was the real Ragnar? That's what we're diving into today.
Exactly. We've got a stack of fascinating material to work with. Everything from the ancient Icelandic sagas to, well, the Danish chronicles penned by Saxo Grammaticus, and even some mentions tucked away in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles.
Right.
We're essentially taking these different lenses and, piecing together the story, or maybe stories, of Ragnar Lothbrok.
Okay, so our mission then is to sift through these accounts, find the key deeds, the events attributed to him, see where the different versions kind of align, or maybe clash pretty hard, and really get to grips with that central, intriguing question. Where does the rich tapestry of legend end and, well, historical fact potentially begin?
And this isn't just some academic exercise in source comparison. It's really about understanding how these figures were built up, how their tales evolved across cultures and time, and why someone like Ragnar still captures our imagination centuries later.
Yeah.
Think of this as your essential guide, your shortcut maybe, to navigating the complex picture of arguably the most famous Viking name out there.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. Who was he, according to these sources? The Icelandic accounts we have paint a picture of a young man already destined for greatness.
They do. They describe him as the son of a Danish king. And from a young age, he's presented as exceptionally capable, tall, strong, handsome, yes, but crucially, also very clever. Shrewd.
So not just a brute force warrior then.
Definitely not. I mean, while he was physically imposing, his intelligence was a key part of his legend right from the start. He didn't wait around. He quickly gathered his own warships and set out to, make a name for himself.
Which, in the Viking Age, that meant one thing: raiding.
Precisely. He quickly embarked on raids, and his success wasn't just due to force, but also his cunning. This rapid success meant his reputation grew incredibly fast. He became known far and wide as a powerful, feared, and, well, remarkably clever warlord.
Now, one of the first big iconic stories about him, at least in one set of sources, involves his first marriage. This comes from the Danish chronicler Saxo Grammaticus, right?
That's where we find it, yeah. Saxo tells us one of Ragnar's early significant achievements was defeating the Swedish king Fro. And he wasn't fighting alone. He was assisted by a group of fierce shield maidens.
Ah, shield maidens.
Including one named Lagertha.
Lagertha, okay, yeah, a name most people will recognize from modern adaptations. So in Saxo's version, Ragnar is clearly impressed by her and she becomes his first wife.
Sure.
But getting her hand wasn't straightforward.
Oh, no. Saxo's account gives her a rather unique premarital test for Ragnar. She apparently invited him to her hall, but when he arrived, he discovered she had a wild bear and a huge dog just waiting inside. Yeah. He had to defeat both of these beasts before she would even consider marrying him.
Talk about a tough first date.
Wow, indeed. After passing that interesting test, they married. Saxo says they had a son named Friedleif and 2 daughters. But as you mentioned, this marriage didn't last long.
What was the issue there? Was it just, the Viking life or something specific?
According to Saxo, Lagertha remained very much a warrior herself, fierce and independent. This warlike nature apparently led to frequent quarrels between them, to the point where the relationship couldn't continue. So they eventually separated, and Ragnar went back to his independent raiding life.
Okay, this next story is absolutely essential because it explains the most famous part of his name. The Loth-brok bit.
Ah, yes, the Lothbrok part. This tale involves Jarl Harald of Gotland and his daughter Thora. The Jarl had given Thora a small, rather unfortunate pet, a lindworm, like a kind of snake or dragon.
Okay, and let me guess, it didn't stay small.
Not at all. It grew enormously, just huge. Not only did the lindworm get massive, but the legend says the hoard of treasure it slept on started multiplying as the creature grew.
Wow.
And its size became a serious problem.
A problem like it was blocking access to his daughter, that kind of problem.
Exactly. It was apparently eating an ox every single day, just to give you a sense of scale.
An ox a day.
Right. And it had wrapped itself completely around Thora's hall, making it impossible for anyone to approach her. So the desperate Jarl put out a call. Whoever could rid him of this monster would win his daughter's hand and, implicitly, the dragon's treasure.
Which, of course, caught Ragnar's ear. He hears monster and treasure.
It did. Ragnar, hearing of the challenge and the prize, set off for Gotland. But remember, this wasn't just about strength. Ragnar was known for his cunning. He knew the lindworm wouldn't be easy. Its fangs, its bite, and especially its poisonous breath and blood were deadly.
So he needed more than just a big sword. How did he prepare for a poisonous ox-eating dragon? What was the plan?
This is where we get the nickname. He devised a unique defense. He had a suit of clothing made from particularly thick, strong wool, specifically pants, and a shirt. And then he rolled this woolen gear in tar.
Tar.
Yeah, the idea was that the thick wool would provide a physical barrier, and the sticky tar would repel the dragon's venom and poisonous blood.
He fought a dragon in tar-soaked woolly pants. That sounds incredibly uncomfortable. And probably flammable.
Perhaps, but effective, according to the saga. Armed with a long, powerful spear, he confronted the creature. The thick, tarred wool did its job. It protected him from the dragon's teeth and the deadly poison. He managed to fatally wound the lindworm with his spear.
And the poisonous blood couldn't soak through the tarred wool. It actually worked.
The story says the clothing successfully stopped the poisonous blood as well. With the dragon dead, Ragnar claimed his reward. Immense fame from defeating such a beast, the dragon's treasure, and Thor's hand in marriage. She became his second wife.
And this is where the name Lothbrok comes from. Not the dragon itself, but his outfit.
Precisely. This is the truly fascinating detail here. Lothbrok doesn't mean dragon slayer or anything like that. It refers to that specific armor he wore for this fight.
No way.
Yeah. The term can be translated as wool trousers, or maybe loden trousers, loden being a type of thick, durable wool fabric. Some sources suggest leather or fur pants, but the core idea is protective legwear. He was essentially known as Ragnar Wool Trousers.
Ragnar Wool Trousers, the man who defeated a dragon. I love that. Okay, so he married Thora, brought her back home.
Yes, and the sagas say he loved her very much. They had 2 sons, Eirik and Agnar, who are described as tall and handsome, inheriting their father's looks.
But this marriage, like the first one, was also tragically cut short, wasn't it?
It was. Sadly, after only a few years, Thora became gravely ill and died. Ragnar was apparently devastated by her death. In his grief, he kind of lost interest in the day-to-day ruling of his kingdom. He entrusted power to his sons and followers and returned to his earlier life, leading raids back to the sea.
And he had lost his touch, I assume.
Far from it. He resumed his raiding with renewed vigor. Wherever he went, he was victorious, spreading fear and terror, and his fame just continued to skyrocket. It was on one of these voyages, heading towards Norway, that he encountered a woman named Kraka.
Okay, Kraka. This is another significant figure in his saga, right?
Absolutely. He was immediately captivated by her beauty, but also her intelligence, and fell deeply in love with her.
So Kraka became his third wife, mentioned in the sources we have.
Yes, and with Kraka, he had a number of sons who would become incredibly famous in their own right. Ivar, Björn, Halfdan, and Rognvald are typically mentioned first,
Right.
with a 5th son, Sigurd Snake-Eye, appearing a bit later in the story.
These sons have some pretty memorable nicknames and descriptions in the sagas, don't they?
They certainly do. Ivar is perhaps the most well-known, often called the Boneless or the Legless.
Boneless.
Well, the sagas say he had no bones in his feet or legs, or maybe weak ones, and had to be carried everywhere. But despite this physical challenge, he was consistently portrayed as incredibly intelligent, providing wise counsel and strategic plans that helped his brothers achieve their victories. He was the brains, you could say.
Interesting.
Then there's Björn, who earned the moniker Ironside.
Okay, more straightforward.
Yeah. And Halfdan is widely believed by scholars to be the same person referred to as Svitserk, meaning white shirt, in other historical sources. So possibly the same guy, different names.
So these sons quickly started to make their own mark on the Viking world. They weren't just living in their father's shadow.
Very much so. The sagas detail how they embarked on numerous adventures and raids, establishing themselves as formidable and famous Vikings very quickly.
Now, the sagas also introduce a bit of a dramatic twist involving Kraka and Ragnar's relationships. Gets a bit messy.
They do. Some Danish sources hint at infidelity, mentioning a son named Ube, born from a relationship Ragnar had with another woman while married to Kraka. But the major drama comes when Ragnar, while still married to Kraka, decides to get engaged to the daughter of King Eystein of Uppsala, a princess named Ingebjörn.
Oh boy.
And he apparently intended to keep this a secret from Kraka. Not a great plan.
Okay, how did Kraka, seemingly back home, find out about a secret engagement far away? Magic involved.
That's the saga's magic, exactly. When Ragnar returned, Kraka already knew everything about his planned marriage to Ingebjörn. Her explanation was simple and, well, mystical. 3 birds had flown to her and told her everything.
3 birds told her.
Right, and then she dropped a bombshell. She revealed her true identity. She wasn't just some clever, beautiful woman he met on a voyage. She was actually Aslaug, the highborn daughter of two figures of immense legend, the hero Sigurd the Dragon Slayer and the powerful Valkyrie Brunhilde.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a lineage. You don't just casually mention that. Ragnar must have had trouble believing that.
He absolutely did. He was skeptical of her story. I mean, who wouldn't be? So Krika offered proof. She made a specific prediction. She told Ragnar that their next son would be born with a strange, identifying mark in his eye that looked like a snake.
A snake in his eye.
Yes. This mark would serve as confirmation of her extraordinary ancestry and, crucially, as a sign that he must abandon his plans to marry Ingebjorn.
And the prophecy came true, I take it.
It did. When their next son was born, he had this distinctive mark in his eye that resembled a snake, which is why he was named Sigurd Snake-Eye. This naturally confirmed Aslaug's identity for Ragnar.
Faced with that kind of proof of his wife's legendary status, he had to make his choice.
He did. He chose Aslaug and definitively broke off the engagement to King Eystein's daughter. As you can imagine, King Eystein was not pleased. He saw this as a major insult and betrayal.
Which naturally in that world led to conflict.
It did. War ensued, but in the end, Ragnar's sons, now growing into formidable warriors themselves, were victorious in this conflict against King Eystein.
It feels like, as these sons grow up and achieve their own fame, Ragnar himself starts to move slightly out of the spotlight in the sagas. Is that right?
That's a key development in the narratives, absolutely.
Yeah.
The sagas spend a lot more time detailing the sons' exploits as the stories go on, and the list of sons varies depending on the source. The Icelandic sagas typically give him 7, with Thora and Aslaug, Eirik, Agnar, Ivar, Björn, Halfdan, Rognvald, Sigurd.
Right.
While the Danish sources also include Fridleif from Lagertha, and maybe that's Anue. But yeah, in many versions, the sons' adventures, their conquests, their interactions become the main focus. Sometimes Ragnar's own deeds feel more like the setup for their story.
They weren't just his heirs. They were becoming major historical or legendary figures in their own right.
Absolutely. They conquered vast territories, they divided kingdoms amongst themselves, led massive, notorious raids that are recorded in various chronicles outside the sagas too. The sagas often emphasize that it was the sons who were leading the major battles later on. Their stories are so rich and extensive, honestly, they could easily warrant their own deep dive.
Definitely. But the sagas aren't quite done with Ragnar yet. He seems compelled to embark on one final, perhaps ill-judged, major exploit. Why?
Yes, according to the legend, Ragnar felt his son's growing fame was starting to eclipse his own. He was getting older, they were in their prime. He wanted one more grand deed that would solidify his personal legend and ensure he wasn't overshadowed. A bit of ego, maybe.
Sounds like it. So he decided on one last epic raid. How did he prepare?
He prepared on a grand scale, building 2 massive ships, huge ones. And the sheer impact of this action speaks volumes about his reputation at this point. Our sources mentioned that the very fact he was constructing these ships was enough to cause neighboring countries to become extremely fearful and prepare for war.
Just because he was building boats.
Exactly. Just anticipating a major attack from Ragnar. His name alone was that powerful.
And where did he set his sights for this final venture?
His target was England, specifically the Kingdom of Northumbria, which was ruled at the time by King Aelle.
Okay. Did Aslaug, his magically connected wife, have any thoughts on this plan? Any warnings this time?
She did, and she had a very bad feeling about it. Aslaug, daughter of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, specifically warned Ragnar that his plan for this particular voyage was ill-conceived and unwise. Said it wouldn't end well. But Ragnar, well.
He was determined to seek glory and wouldn't listen. That sounds like a classic saga moment, ignoring the wise woman's warning.
It really is. But she did give him something for the journey. As a parting gift, maybe hoping to offer some protection against his stubbornness and what she saw as impending fate, she gave him a shirt that she had enchanted.
An enchanted shirt.
Okay.
Hoping to shield him from the consequences of his pride, maybe. How did the voyage go? Did the shirt help?
Well, the voyage itself was disastrous, just as Aslaug feared. While crossing the sea, they encountered a violent storm. The massive ships were wrecked on the English coast, and many of his men were lost.
Shipwrecked, but still Ragnar Lothbrok, I assume. He didn't just give up.
Precisely. Despite being stranded and having lost most of his force, Ragnar and his remaining men didn't surrender or retreat. They immediately began pillaging and plundering the local area, doing what Vikings do.
Which inevitably brought King Aelle down on them.
It did. King Aelle quickly gathered his forces and marched against this unexpected, rather diminished raiding party led by the infamous Ragnar. In the battle, even with limited numbers, Ragnar was still incredibly formidable. The saga claims that in the fight, No shield or helmet could withstand his blows.
Aww.
And weapons couldn't wound him directly, a possible nod to that enchanted shirt offering protection against conventional arms.
But sheer force and a magic shirt weren't enough this time.
No. One by one, his surviving men fell. Ragnar was eventually captured, not by being defeated in direct combat, but by being surrounded and overwhelmed by Aella's army, kind of encircled by their shields.
And King Aella's execution method is perhaps the most gruesome and memorable part of the entire legend, the snake put.
It is. According to the saga, King Aella ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. But here's the incredible twist, the really interesting part. Initially, the snakes couldn't bite him. They couldn't poison him.
Because of the enchanted shirt. Still working.
That's the clear implication in the story. The source states that the snakes were unable to harm him until that enchanted shirt given to him by Aslaug was removed.
Oh.
Once the shirt was taken off, the snake's venom took hold, and that is how Ragnar Lothbrok met his end, in the pit of snakes.
A dramatic, fated death.
Yeah.
And his last words are legendary too, aren't they?
His most famous words, quoted in the sagas as he lay dying, are, "The piglets would grunt if they knew what the boar endures."
Which was a direct challenge, a promise of what was coming from his sons, the piglets.
Exactly. He was referring to his sons, basically promising that they would hear how he had died and would seek a terrible revenge on King Aella for it. And the sagas recount that this is exactly what happened. The fury of Ragnar's sons upon hearing of his death was immense.
I bet.
They swore vengeance and gathered an absolutely enormous army, what the Anglo-Saxon chronicles would later terrifyingly refer to as the Great Heathen Army.
A name that definitely echoes through history.
It does. They invaded England with a singular purpose: vengeance for their father. They ravaged large parts of the country and ultimately captured King Aella, executing him in a particularly brutal manner. The Blood Eagle is sometimes mentioned, though that's debated specifically to avenge Ragnar's death.
And Ivar was involved in planning that.
The sagas often credit Ivar the Boneless, the strategist, with being the mastermind behind this massive invasion force.
So we've journeyed through this incredible saga, a warrior king fighting monsters in special trousers, navigating complex marriages, seeing his sons rise to prominence, facing a fateful final raid, and ultimately being avenged by those very sons. Now let's confront the big question. How much of this is history, and how much is legend? Was Ragnar Lothbrok a real person?
That really is the heart of the scholarly debate when you look at these different sources together. If we connect this to the broader historical context, what seems pretty undeniable is that many of the figures identified as Ragnar's sons were real historical individuals.
Right.
We have solid evidence for figures like Ivar the Boneless, Björn Ironside, Uwe, Sigurd Snake-Eye, and very likely Halfdan or Fitzurk existing and being powerful Viking leaders in the 9th century. Their names pop up in contemporary records.
So while the specific, sometimes fantastical deeds attributed to them in the sagas might be legendary embellishments, the men themselves were absolutely real and had a significant impact on history.
Precisely. And that massive force, the Great Heathen Army that invaded England in the late 9th century, it absolutely existed. That's confirmed by contemporary Anglo-Saxon chronicles. They were terrified of it.
And those chronicles mention the sons.
Yes, and crucially, those chronicles even mention Ivar and Uwe as brothers and as the sons of a Ragnar, or a Lothbrok in some versions.
Okay, so the sons are real, the army is real, and they're linked to a father named Ragnar. But Ragnar Lothbrok himself, he's not clearly found in non-saga historical records in the same way.
That's the puzzle.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that despite the incredibly detailed sagas about him, there is no single clear historical figure who definitively matches the full legendary Ragnar Lothbrok with all the stories attached. This has led many historians to believe that the Ragnar of the sagas might be a composite figure, perhaps an amalgamation of several historical Viking leaders named Ragnar, or even, a legendary figure invented, at least in part, to provide a suitably famous and heroic father for his historically very real and powerful sons. Like, they needed a legendary dad.
So less a single historical person and more a legendary archetype, maybe a symbol?
Potentially. However, it's probably not purely invention. Our sources do point to possible historical kernels. For instance, Frankish chronicles from 845 mention a powerful Viking prince named Regenerus, or Ragnar, who led a massive army to attack Paris. Sacked it, actually.
Okay, that sounds like a major figure.
Definitely. To command such a force, he would have had to be a leader of considerable renown and power. This historical Ragnar, the Paris attacker, could very well be a basis, a foundational piece, for the later, more elaborate legend of Ragnar Lothbrok.
So the historical reality is complex. The legendary figure, complete with dragons and magical shirts, might be more myth than man, but the sons, the army they led, and even a potential historical inspiration for the father were very much real forces in the Viking Age.
That's the brilliant and sometimes frustrating way these sources weave history and myth together, leaving us with a figure who is both elusive and undeniably impactful through his legend and his sons.
Wow, what a tangled web of legend and history we've just untangled. I mean, from the tar-trousered dragon slayer to the father whose death sparked a massive invasion, all drawn from these incredible, sometimes contradictory ancient accounts.
And you can really appreciate how weaving together the Icelandic sagas, the Danish chronicles, and those snippets from Anglo-Saxon accounts gives us this incredibly rich, multifaceted, and ultimately complex picture of a figure who dominated Viking lore. It's not just one story.
So why spend this time deep diving into a figure who might be more legend than history? Why should you care? Well, because it teaches us so much about how stories are built, how different cultures record and interpret events, and how legendary figures can encapsulate the spirit and values of an entire age.
Yeah.
It gives you a far richer understanding of the Viking world than simply reading a list of dates and battles, right?
It absolutely brings the period to life in a unique way. You get the mindset, the values, the storytelling.
Definitely. And here's the thing to ponder as you move on with your day. If the elaborate legend of Ragnar Lothbrok was perhaps crafted, at least in part, to provide a suitably epic origin story for his historically real and immensely famous sons, what does that tell us? What does it say about the power of lineage, the importance of legacy, and the enduring human need for powerful, resonant storytelling in societies like the Viking one? Something to think about.